Hello. On this channel, I usually do not comment on the work of contemporary writers and thinkers, but the reason I'm making an exception for this book, Suicidal Empathy by Gad Saad, is because of its thematic closeness with my own work. Since I myself have produced a lot of work on oikophobia, or cultural self-hate, more so in fact than has anyone else in the world, and foremost in my book Western Self-Contempt from Cornell University Press, it has happened quite often that readers and viewers have asked me about Gad Saad's concept of suicidal empathy, what I think about it, whether it's the same thing as oikophobia, whether it explains better what's going on, and so on. I've commented publicly on these questions a little bit here and there, foremost in some interviews recently, but since the issue keeps coming up, I decided to make a separate lecture video about it. Now, before I proceed, I should point out that I like Gad Saad. I've never met him in person, but he and I are definitely on the same side in the question of the large civilizational struggles and fault lines we're facing. And I'm sure that he and I have a lot more agreements than disagreements. But I am a philosopher, and my job is to get at the truth to the best of my ability. And so, for the reasons I stated, I have to explain why the analysis, such as it is, of suicidal empathy is wrong. Here are two clips in which I made some brief remarks on the subject before.
Since I've written about oikophobia, people keep writing me about Gad Saad's notion of suicidal empathy. And says, like, well, isn't this the same thing? I said, well, not really. And I think that suicidal empathy, of course, there is such a thing. But I think that that is often has less explanatory power because very often it isn't genuine empathy. Rather, it is a compensatory act for the fact that we have lost the ability to be proud of our own tradition. And so we want to be proud of somebody else's tradition and promote that tradition. So it's not genuine empathy.
And
there is a concept doing the rounds right now known as suicidal empathy. And from Gad Saad. Yeah, there is some truth to that, but the reason why oikophobia is the more accurate concept is because most of the time when people do feel this so-called suicidal empathy, it's not really empathy. It can be in a few isolated cases, but most of all, it's actually a hatred or a fear, a dislike of one's own culture, which translates perhaps in its outer expression to empathy of other cultures.
Empathy to those who also hate your home or who want to destroy your
That's
home.
right.
That's such an... Yeah.
Exactly. So the explanatory power of the idea of suicidal empathy is very limited because when we talk about the people who are like this, they are much more motivated by antipathy toward their own culture than by love for somebody else.
so let's flesh this out a little bit. The explanatory model of suicidal empathy is wrong for most instances. It is in fact oikophobia that explains them. That is, most of the people Gad Saad criticizes are motivated more by antipathy than by empathy, which one can see on the specific examples he discusses. Saad writes on the first page of the preface, Roman numeral 11, that whether when dealing with immigration, the justice system, the homelessness crisis, or transgender rights in women's sports, outlandish policies are instituted precisely because of suicidal empathy. This results in a wide range of misguided empathetic inequalities. But this is plainly incorrect. If one studies the psychological motivation of most of the people involved in these things, one will find far more hatred than love, far more antipathy than empathy. That is, far more oikophobia. Let's look at three examples, among many, that Gad Saad brings up. On page 22, he writes, in reference to the former president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, that in supporting a serial plagiarist, Harvard was willing to damage its reputation, a clear form of institutional suicidal empathy. This is wrong because the reason someone like Claudine Gay ever became president of Harvard in the first place, and for some time received support from the academic establishment in spite of her shortcomings, was not because of genuine empathy for black people, but because the academic establishment prides itself on tearing down what they consider to be an overbearing white elite, and on tearing down our academic and social traditions. But an even clearer example is the second one that I want to talk to you about, which is on page 74. Here, Gad Saad writes about the case of Daniel Penny, the white man who was accused of manslaughter after having subdued the rowdy and threatening black man Jordan Neely in the subway, right here in my own city of New York. Saad writes, again on page 74, that Penny was charged in the first place speaks to two realities. One, Penny was white, whereas Neely was black. When a few weeks later, a black man killed another black man who was harassing people on the New York subway, the perpetrator was not charged. 2. The reflex of suicidal empathy toward Neely, who was black, mentally ill, homeless, and a repeat criminal. Once again, this is wrong, and this example is especially striking. By juxtaposing the two different cases of black men being killed in the New York subway, where the judicial result was different because of the different identities of the so-called perpetrators, Gad Saad is unwittingly showing that it has nothing to do with empathy for a poor dead black man, because one of them was completely ignored, but that it has everything to do with hatred of the white man. That is, once again, antipathy, oikophobia, not empathy. Finally, a third example is on page 105, where Gad Saad writes about the attitudes of the cult of climate alarmism. He says, in the empathetic quest to protect Mother Earth from being raped by capitalism, it is vital to protect the Chinese communist regime from climate scrutiny. All attention must be focused on the white Texan cattle farmer who has sired 6 children. His cattle and his white children are killing Mother Earth. Once again, Gad Saad unwittingly shows that it's not a question of genuine empathy, in this case for the environment and endangered species, because if it were, the Chinese would also be condemned by the climate alarmists. Rather, it is a question of despising Texan farmers and the like. So once again, we are dealing with antipathy, with oikophobia, and not with suicidal empathy. A few times, Gad Saad even comes quite close to acknowledging this fact, but he's not quite able to get there. For example, on page 72, he writes, civilizational seppuku requires not only that one empathize with violent criminals more so than their victims, but it also demands a hostility toward those tasked to protect us from such criminals. Okay, so here he comes close to seeing what it's actually about, the hostility. But unfortunately, like I said, he doesn't quite get there. If he had, he would have had to rewrite the entire book. This fundamental error leads to one additional problem. Gad Saad ends up portraying many of the people under discussion as mistaken but well-motivated, because a lot of people would say that empathy is a virtue. I personally am not one of those people, but that's a different story. As well-motivated, the people under discussion thus become at least capable of garnering the observer's sympathy, which is almost certainly contrary to the outcome that Gad Saad himself desires, since he seeks to ridicule them. They would become a lot less sympathetic to the observer if we realized right away that they are not motivated by empathy, but by antipathy and oikophobia. Now, as I said in the 2 clips in the beginning of this video, one can find some individual instances of genuine suicidal empathy. I myself have known a couple of people over the years who were truly empathetic for other peoples and cultures, but who did not hate their own culture. They were simply just clueless. But those people really are a minority. And if we wish to understand why things are going so poorly with our civilization right now, we must properly understand the underlying concepts. And there, oikophobia features much more strongly and frequently than suicidal empathy. So there you have it. As I said in the beginning, I generally prefer to offer my own philosophy on this channel rather than commenting on others, but in this case I felt I had to make an exception due to the thematic proximity of Gad Saad's work to my own. But this is of course a purely philosophical discussion. We have to understand what's going on. But it's worth pointing out, again, that I certainly support Saad in his efforts in favor of Western civilization. Thank you.